Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am here with my co-host, Matt.
What's going on, guys?
And we are excited to start our 32-team series, and we're going to break it down by division and give you all of the fantasy changes, the impacts, and where we see these guys as of now in the offseason. If you've been enjoying our offseason content, please don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to subscribe. And we'll go through. We've been doing some content on the rookies, so we'll kind of plug the additional content that we already created on the rookies as we go through. So hopefully you guys are staying with us, and hopefully you continue to enjoy what we're putting out here. And we're going to get a lot more into fantasy specific things and a lot more into two quarterback specific outlooks within this series. So hopefully our target audience there is going to be able to stick with us, and hopefully we can get some more people on board with Superflex is the superior option here. So
yeah.
All right, so we're going to get into our we're going to start with the AFC West. So teeing up our first team with the AFC West, I'll throw it over to Matt.
Kansas City Chiefs starting right at the top, Super Bowl champions. I mean, number 3 seed last year in the playoffs. We thought, maybe this was going to be the year where they weren't going to make a run. And, there were some question marks about whether or not Mahomes could win on the road in the playoffs. And what do? They rip off Miami at home, Buffalo on the road, and then Baltimore on the road, and then eventually the Super Bowl. So they're in a great spot going forward again. I don't really see them doing any worse than, the AFC Championship this upcoming year, injury aside. But I don't know, man. They knocked it out of the park. And looking at the offseason, they had to trade Snead to Tennessee, and then they ended up. Did they trade Snead to Tennessee, or was that a cut for cap? I forget.
No, I think they traded him.
There was a trade. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they re-signed Chris Jones, and then one of the biggest things in my opinion was bringing in Hollywood Brown, because we don't really know what's going to happen with Rashee Rice. I'm seeing kind of a minimum-ish of 8 games. That's sort of TBD. But Hollywood Brown is a really proven veteran receiver at this point who should be able to jump right into that offense very quickly. And then in the draft they moved up to get Xavier Worthy, who a lot of people think his game is pretty similar to Hollywood Brown's. You add 2 absolute burners on an offense with Mahomes' arm. I think that's going to be pretty special to see. And one of the things is we kind of dive more into the fantasy value of these different wide receivers is how are people going to rank Rashee Rice? Because I can envision a scenario where the Chiefs are 7-1, the suspension's over, the offense is humming. How quickly are they going to be itching to get him back on the field? How do they kind of view him? Kansas City's done it before him. They'll do it without him. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I guess what do you think about the offseason? And then we'll jump over to the fantasy relevant stuff.
Yeah, I was very happy to see them keep Chris Jones. I think that's going to keep their the front line of their defense. Obviously, with Snead gone, they're going to have a big hole in the secondary, but they do have some playmakers back there too. So I think too, it was interesting. Like we talk about how they kind of scraped their way to a Super Bowl win. Like last year definitely felt like the year to get them. If you were going to get them, it felt like last year was the year, because now all of a sudden they have these new weapons, and I expect Rice to get hit with at least 8 games. My opinion is he probably should be out the whole year. But if it's 8 games, 10 games, he's going to be more, like you mentioned, an add-on at the end of the year, I think. And the ADPs don't reflect that yet. I mean, he's being drafted, or the ADP is at 33, but I think a lot of that data includes when he was in the top 15 before all this happened. So I expect Hollywood Brown to be somewhere around 20 to 25 amongst receivers. In a Superflex draft, right, you kind of pull everybody down 2 rounds. So if you're listening and you're not part of a Superflex draft yet, kind of push these guys up 2 rounds. But I expect in a Superflex type of league, Hollywood to be like a 6th, 7th round pick. As somebody's 3rd receiver. I think there might be some other more stable options that won't have the Rice question mark as you get later in the year, that could end up being drafted as starters over him. But I think overall that he's going to have a high upside. And I know that there's comparisons between Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy's game, but I don't think at this point in their careers that they're going to play that similar role. I think that Hollywood's going to be the easy number one, and that he was able to pull in 10 targets a game pretty much his entire time in Arizona. I know at the end of the year last year, it just, I don't know exactly what happened. Kyler came back. The offense was weird. They were throwing it to McBride every play. Like, I'm not exactly sure that I'm going to hold that against him, even though maybe I should. You know, if he comes out flat, doesn't have a lot of targets early, I just don't see that in this Kansas City offense. I think he's going to be better than anything that they had to start last year. And Worthy is going to be that Marcus Valdez-Scantling role, except for he's able to catch the ball. So, you know, I expect low volume for Worthy, but I expect high impact when he does get the ball. So I think the offense is just set up in this excellent spot for Mahomes. And, you know, we have marked here, getting into the quarterback specific part of this, we have it marked here that Mahomes finished as QB8 last year. There's no way to get around the fact that he was a major disappointment in fantasy. They didn't need to score a lot of points. The defense was really good, and they leaned on Pacheco, and, you know, he just didn't have to do as much as maybe he did in the past. Now, I think with the rebuilt offense and weapons, Kelce's back. He won't come into hopefully anyways, he won't be coming into this year injured. And, you know, Mahomes, I expect his ADP is third. I expect him to be up there. You know, I don't know if I'd draft him 3, just because I think Hurts, Allen, and Lamar maybe go in front of him, maybe Stroud, but there's a tier of 5 at the top amongst quarterbacks, and he's firmly locked in there. In a Superflex league, he's going to be a first round pick, maybe an early second round pick in our draft. If he does go 5th amongst quarterbacks, you know, he'll be in the top 15 somewhere. And so, you know, I think obviously he's a stud. So, that's kind of how I see the receivers breaking down. I think Rice, unfortunately, is kind of going to be an afterthought if he's even drafted.
Yeah, I think at this point, you know, I agree with your rankings. I kind of go back and forth with Mahomes and Lamar. I know we've talked about this just because, you know, Baltimore, they don't necessarily always need him to throw that much, and he seems to kind of save his legs for the postseason. But yeah, I think he's going to have a big bounce back year. And, you know, adding to the point you made about the wide receivers, you know, for me, Hollywood is someone that, you know, I think is going to be a top 15 guy for the first couple months of the season. So I'm definitely bumping him up just because, you know, they will involve Worthy more catching passes as the years go on, but for now they're just going to say go run and scare people and, you know, take the safeties back. But I did want to throw to you Isiah Pacheco, because to me he's not a guy that I've ever really had on my teams. I've always, you know, liked him as a playmaker. I'm kind of liking him more and more that I think about it. And right now he's RB11 according to Fantasy Pros. How are you kind of viewing him? What are your thoughts? And, you know, they don't really seem to have much competition, or he doesn't seem to have much competition in the backfield. So how are you kind of viewing him going into the year?
I like Pacheco this year. I did draft him last year in our league. He went in round like 11. So, you know, I think that speaks to the state of the running back position, in my opinion, that if you can get somebody like that in round 11, like, I'm not interested in drafting running backs early when you have to fill multiple quarterback positions and 3 wide receivers with a flex, right? Like, in my opinion, that just pushes running backs down the board, because you can find somebody, you know, hero RB works really well in this setup, but, you know, maybe Pacheco turns into your hero if you can get him in round 4. Like if you go quarterback, receiver, you start with a, you know, CJ Stroud, AJ Brown, and a DJ Moore start, right? And then you get Pacheco in round 4. I could see that being the case, you know, if you can't get a Josh Jacobs at ETN, and he's going to go around the Devon Achane, the Rachaad White, Ken Walker, Joe Mixon, Pacheco. Like, that's going to be the section of running back that he goes in. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that area of running back shakes out ADP wise too, because the further down he starts to get pushed, the more I'm going to like him. And that's kind of obvious, but at his current position of 11, like, I'm not interested in drafting him really, because is there really that big of a difference between Pacheco and Aaron Jones, who goes 18? Or is there really that big of a difference between Pacheco and Ramondre Stevenson, who goes 21? Like, Zamir White is somebody that could get a lead role, is going 22. It just seems like maybe he's a little bit pushed up the board. His value is elevated a little bit on Fantasy Pros. Now, the reason I say he's an interesting one is because there is a element to this where ESPN has him ranked at 14 and Sleeper has him ranked at 55 and Fantasy Pros has him ranked at 11 amongst running backs. And I don't have the overall right in front of me, but like I'm imagining somewhere in between the 14 and 55. So for me, I'm probably not going to end up with him this year just because there's a lot of running backs right next to him. But overall, as a player, I think that he's going to be very good for anybody who plays in a smaller wide receiver, anybody who's playing in regular leagues. I think he's going to end up getting pushed up into that 3rd round range. So for us, I expect, round 5, maybe round 4, round 5, something like that.
So when you say 14, is that overall for ESPN?
Yeah. Yes.
They're so bad with that sometimes.
They're not good with keeping rankings updated. And I mean, they have him still around that RB10 range, but they just don't push receivers up high enough. Like he's ranked on ESPN over a lot of receivers that, for the purposes of our conversation, isn't really that relevant because they play in 2 receiver flex. And when you don't need that 3rd receiver in your starting lineup, when you don't need that 4th receiver in your starting lineup, when you don't need that 5th good receiver on your bench for bye weeks and stuff, the running backs are going to get pushed up. And so, I think on ESPN with their standard format, the way they're ranking, maybe that makes more sense. But for more advanced fantasy players, like ESPN rankings are kind of not for you. They're not built out for the more competitive players.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And last but not least, with Kelce, he finished tight end 3 last year. They've got him at number 2 this year. He's someone that I could imagine his name will kind of inflate his draft stock a little bit, but I don't know. My fear with him, I guess, just as he's getting a little bit older, is that they may not rely on him as much during the regular season. If they're kind of cruising, obviously his value is going to come playoff time. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but he's probably not a guy that I'm going to be drafting too much of, just if he is that number 2 tight end and given the depth of the position this year. I know you've mocked him a few times, but just because he's fallen. But what do you think about him for this year?
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with you more. I think the ADP is going to change drastically on Kelce. If he's going at 30 overall, like that's going to be a major steal. It's going to be a massive advantage to have him at that point in the draft, right? I mean, every single year over the last 5, 6, 7 years, you've had to get him in the 1st round, maybe in the 2nd round, but in the top 15 picks. Even in Superflex, he's been going in the top 15 picks. And, I get the depth of the position, but like we say that, I feel like we've been saying that more and more and more every year. And it's like the depth at the position is like Kyle Pitts at 7, David Njoku at 8, like, Dalton Kincaid at 6. Like, I just, there's all cases to be made for those guys, George Kittle at 9, like there's all cases to McBride at 3, like Laporta at 1, probably, I'm guessing is where he is at the overall consensus ranking. But if those are the guys that are going to suppress Kelce's value, give me Kelce all day long. And if I'm passing on a guy like Pacheco, for example, or I'm passing on Devontae Smith, or I'm passing on T. Higgins' range of receivers, I don't have any question whatsoever about doing that to draft Kelce. It's when you have to miss out on the tier of receiver like Puka Nacua or DJ Moore or AJ Brown, even, like that's usually where Kelce has been going. And, to me, I'm fine getting wide receiver 25 instead of wide receiver 17 if I get Kelce on my team. That's just how I'm going to feel about it pretty much no matter what. Like, I'll take a Jaden Reed at 30 even, to wait a couple rounds and take Kelce, because I would prefer to not end up with David Njoku. I like Kittle. I like waiting generally where in our draft setups, right, we have a unique setup where it's 3 wide receiver and super flex. So the tight ends usually get pushed down that aren't the elite ones like Kelce. So for example, we had Kyle Pitts last year, who was like 5th. We had Travis Kelce. George Kittle. Though both of those guys went in round 9. Like I think TJ Hawkinson went in round 7. So, these guys get pushed down as you need more starters at other positions because the positional advantage just when you have more players and more points, doesn't become as big of an issue. But for Kelce, I think very much worth a third or even fourth round pick if he's going to get picked there at the 3-4 turn.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. Any other points on the Chiefs?
No, I don't think so, other than just highlighting again, reiterating the fact that Snead is gone. And I think that their defense might suffer a little bit, or in ways, that they just have natural regression. They're a very young group. They lose their star corner, and they're going to give up more points this year than they did last year. So I think when you're projecting out and looking at the overall outlook of the offense, I think they are going to produce at a higher level than they did last year. So give everybody trend up on last year. And, I highlighted Snead, but I think the defense as a whole is going to take a step back.
Cool. Fair enough. Awesome,
All
guys.
right.
Well, go ahead.
If you're still with us, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe. And we hope to see you guys here every day as we continue to go through the AFC West and the rest of the divisions.
Thanks, guys.